Hey guys, today I'm gonna show you how I remade Selfish by Justin Timberlake just like this. When I first heard the drums in this song, I thought, oh, this is kind of giving me like retro drum machine vibes, especially some of the percussion sounds and the clap sound. So I started to look for Roland TR-808 sounds in Splice, and I knew I was on the right track when I heard these clap samples. I initially tried using a VST emulation of the 808 drum machine, but I ended up going for samples instead. And that's because only part of the drum sound is given that retro vibe. For example, the kick sounds much more modern to me. And when using samples, I can really easily mix and match between these different sounds and different eras. Now, like I said, the kick sounds much more modern to me, like your typical hip-hop trappy kick. On top of this kick, I layered a texture kick, just to give that main kick some more presence. Together. The kick may not sound better to you in solo with this texture kick, but in the context of the whole track, it really makes the kick stand out so much more. Now, without the texture kick in the whole track. With the texture. Just makes the kick knock harder and sound much more present. Now listen to the kick pattern, because I really love the syncopation and the bounce it gives. Just listen to what would happen if I chose more predictable spots for the kicks. For example, this. I mean, the whole bounce disappeared. It really doesn't sound that engaging anymore. Now for the clap, I chose an 808 clap that sounds like this. I also layered in a couple more 808 claps just to give it more width and really more depth. On this wide clap, I added a sample delay, which just delays the right side a little bit and makes it wider. I also added this third clap layer, which is shifted a little bit to the right, and it gives this flam sound to the claps. Without the clap layers. So much better. Now for the 808 percussion sounds, we have a couple of toms and a rim that sounds like this. And just notice with the kick and the snare how these percussion sounds never step on the kick and the snare. They kind of fill in the spaces in between. The last drum elements are some hats and some shakers. I cut up this tambourine loop, and now it sounds like this. Then we got a couple of open hats. We got a 808 maracas. We got a closed hat. And we got another open hat at the end. Now notice how lo-fi these hats and shakers sound. And to achieve that sound, I added the vinyl plugin, set it to 1980, just makes it a little bit more lo-fi and retro sounding. And I also added the Simplon plugin from FabFilter, which is called, it's a preset called Old Speaker. Just really makes it a little bit more lo-fi. So without the vinyl and the Simplon, with, And this just makes the heads and shakers sit nicely with the rest of the drums because they don't take up a lot of focus in the mix. Now that we got the drums down, let's move on to the bass, which is an 808 in this song. And when it comes to 808s, choosing the right sound is key. There's not a single 808 sound that'll fit every song, so you really need to choose the right sound for your song. For this remake, I wanted a slightly distorted 808. Nothing crazy, but not completely clean either. Now, just listen to what choosing the wrong 808 sound would do to my track. I mean, this 808 has too much of that buzz sound, too much distortion, and really just takes a lot of focus away from the other elements. You know, it would take all the focus away from the vocals, for example, which is the most important element in this song. Now, to get this 808 to cut through the mix a little bit better, I added an octave up, which I completely destroyed, by the way. And I know this sounds ridiculous on its own, but with the main 808, it just makes the 808 a little bit easier to hear on smaller speakers. And I also just saturated the main 808 a little bit to also make it easier to hear on phone speakers and laptop speakers. Now at the end I have some sidechain compression, which ducks the 808 to the kick. As you can see, there's not a lot of gain reduction, it's just a little bit to get that initial kick transient through. Now, before I show you the cool lead synth in the chorus, we gotta check out these chords. And these synth chords are made up of 3 layers: a low synth, an octave up, and an organ layer. And each of these layers add something different and have their own space in the frequency spectrum. Keep in mind that this synth chord or pad is really not something you hear in the track, it's more felt. And that's something you should think about when you're making your own songs. If all your elements in your song begs for attention, then your song is gonna be all over the place. You need some elements that just sit in the background and support, and then you can give the focus to some other elements. Just like this pad is really just supporting everything else, and the drums, vocals, and the 808 is really more in focus. Now let's talk about this lead synth sound. Without any effects, it sounds like this, a boring pluck. Just a simple pluck in the Arturia Analog Lab. And what really makes the sound amazing is the effects. So I'm adding a little bit of RC20 for some wobble and some distortion. Then I'm adding some chorus. And watch what happens with this reverb. And now it's really starting to sound like the sound from the original. I also just filtered out some of the low and high end to make that sound a little bit more lo-fi and make it sit a little bit more in the back. And in addition to this, I sent the sound to a send, where I just put a guitar amp on. And this just really blended in some more distortion, some more gritty texture. Now listen with. Yeah. Now listen to the sound in the track without these plugins and without the send. With everything. And I mean, it's night and day. And this is something you should keep in mind when you're making your own track. Sometimes you can make really interesting sounds from really boring patches. Start out with a boring sound and try stacking effects on top of each other, and sometimes you can end up making something really interesting. Now, before we wrap this up, I really want to show you a little bit of my processing on the track stacks, my bass track stack, my drums, my instruments and so on, and what I did to the master bus or the mix bus. So on the bass, as I mentioned, I did a little bit of sidechain, but I also did a little bit of compression, and I really love to use the LA2A on the bass bus to just even out the bass a little bit. So it's not doing more than about 3 dB, and it's just evening out the bass, so you suddenly don't get a drop of bass, and then you suddenly have a lot more bass one place. And for the drums, I did a little bit of bass boost with the Pultec style EQ, a little bit at 100. I mean, it's half a dB, it's nothing really, and 1 dB at 10K. And then I did some saturation, which can really make the drums sound bigger without adding a lot more volume. I also ran the drums through a plugin called the Little Radiator from Soundtoys, which is a preamp to give it some more analog texture. And I did a little bit of compression at the end. So now without the plugins, and I'm gonna put them on one at a time. So as you can see, there's not really a huge difference. Putting in these small details really matter though, if you want your tracks to sound more professional. Now let's look at the mix bus at the end. First, I have a low cut, which is just cutting everything below 18 Hertz, because that's just low rumble that you really don't hear anyway. Then I have some compression. And I really love this Buster SC emulation of an SSL bus compressor. And as you can see, it's not doing a lot, maybe a dB. Sometimes I would do more, but in this case, I didn't do too much. And then I'm going to a multiband with a preset called 3-band compressor. And it's just boosting a little bit of top. And then I'm going into a J37, which is a tape machine from Waves, the preset mastering fat, tight, and open. And then I'm just getting down a little bit because it got a little bit loud. And then I added some magic mastering in the Saturn plugin at the end. Yeah, and at the end, I'm doing some limiting with a preset called Clipper, which is just doing like 5 dB of gain here. Now, let me put in one plugin at a time so you can hear the difference. EQ in. A compression. Multiband, another tape, Saturn, the limiter. Now, as you can hear, each of these plugins, again, they're not adding a drastic difference, just a little bit, adding a little bit and a little bit and a little bit. Just get some more warmth and to just glue that mix more together. And again, these details are really what makes your track sound professional. It's not about one plugin doing all the work. It's about small steps and small details to get your production better and sounding more professional. Now, if you want to learn more about hit songs and how they're made, you should really check out my remake of Greedy and the last one I did of Yes and by Ariana Grande, where again I show you this whole process, and watching these videos are gonna show you a little bit of different styles and teach you how you can make similar sounding tracks.